Greetings. Welcome to a new episode of Art Matters. I'm your host, Dwayne Quackenbush. Today we're having a experiment in format. We're going to spend the whole time with one artist, and I'd like to introduce Alexandra Kent from Jamestown. Alexandra and I met recently, and we've been talking a lot about art and the magic that is art, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I usually talk to people about how they developed an interest, because you're a visual artist and you obviously had a journey to get to where you are now.
Yes, I mean, growing up, I always, I can't remember not drawing and making things, but I never thought that it could be something I could do as a profession, or you know, and so it took me a long time. I would always be trying to think in terms of, well, what can I do to earn a living, but that really wouldn't take much work, so that I would have lots of free time to make art when I wasn't working.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
it's kind of the equivalent of, oh, I'm going to be an actor, but I need to do something so that I can go on all these auditions and support myself. And
right. Yeah, I had a lot of, I had a conversation with a relative, an aunt, who said, look, you need to distinguish between being and doing. She said, you are an artist. And she said, whatever you do for a job, it just serves that vision. So you are not a waitress or a cashier or whatever you might be doing to pay the bills. You are an artist. But, you know, if somebody says, oh, well, what do you do to pay the bills? That's an entirely different thing. And that made me feel much better, because then I felt like I was serving that greater vision, rather than saying, yes, I've done nothing in life but be a waitress.
But also, even if you do something that is not art, everything that happens to you in life is going to feed that
Right.
part of your, you're going to be filling a reservoir of images and thoughts and ideas, and you'll be meeting people no matter what situation you're in, especially if you're dealing with the public. You'll be inspired by the people that you meet, the things that you see, books that you read, everything.
Everything goes into it. And I do, that's one thing I love about making art, is that it is wide open like that. You don't have to sort of say, oh, well, I'm just, you know, going to focus on one of my diverse interests. You know, it all goes into it. And if I say, well, no, I want to, you know, this morning I was filling the hummingbird feeder, and, you know, that's just where I live is very important to me, because everything I look at every day, visually it's important to me.
Well, you live in a rural environment. I would call it rural, but it's also like literally a stone's throw away from the water.
Right.
And you have the inspiration of the ocean, and I know that you have livestock
Yes.
and pets, and even your studio is an inspiration, that space that you've definitely made your own.
Right. I mean, I know, yeah, when you speak about livestock and pets, and that's something that's important with some of the paintings I brought too. When I was a kid, and I grew up in the inner city, not somewhere rural.
No, you can say where you grew up.
I grew up in inner city New Haven in an apartment over a drugstore, which was broken into with some frequency.
Mhm.
But the family had a very street smart cat.
Mm.
She could cross the busiest street in New Haven, and it's fair to say, I was obsessed with this cat. I just loved her. I wanted to draw her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm half Russian. My father is Russian, and so my Russian grandfather, he wasn't an artist by profession. He was a mathematician, but he could draw very well. And he never learned to speak English. He emigrated here in 1950. But
Mm-hmm.
we would communicate. I spoke Russian, but we would communicate by drawing. And he was quite critical. You know, I would show him, well, here's my drawings of cats, and he would point out what was wrong. Well, that doesn't look like the cat.
Well, just think about the artist with the mind of a mathematician. Again, they're going to feed into each other.
Right, right. And so he really was the one. I became consumed with being able to draw a cat well, and to learn the way the body moved, and to learn to observe all these things about the cat. And so that really was the beginning, because then I applied all of those things to drawing other things that I saw around me, whether it was, you know, people or animals, or but it really was, you know, my Russian grandfather showed me that what was wrong with my cats was I wasn't aware enough of the anatomy, and he explained the bone structure and what it looked like. Then I was like, oh, and after that, then I sort of had, you know, I had the fun of realizing, like, wait, if I do it this way, then it really looks great, and people will look at it and be like, oh, that's a cat.
Right, the structure. It's
Yeah.
even more than proportion. You have to know what's going on underneath.
Yeah.
And back then, obviously, you weren't going in and looking on the internet. Well, what does this cat skeleton look like?
Right.
And you probably didn't have any books, so
I didn't.
you do just by observation.
Yeah. Later, when I went to art school in Boston, one of my drawing teachers would have us go to the Museum of Natural History
Mm-hmm.
to draw birds, and they had loads of bird skeletons and different kinds of birds, and they have a very different anatomy.
Yes.
You know, I always enjoyed lots of life drawing classes to draw the human figure,
Sure.
but birds were different. So I even studied anatomy for artists. That was one of my favorite classes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because you didn't need to worry about organs and all the messy stuff.
Right.
Just
But even
bones
going
and
back to the
muscles.
cats, the structure of the leg, their toes are like this, but then this thing up here, that's the ankle,
right,
even though it's that far up. And I don't even know if a lot of people know that.
right.
Yeah.
No, that's the same with birds too. It's like people
Yep.
think that, oh, here's a bird leg, and they think the knee will be like a human knee. No.
No, it's everything. It seems like it's backwards, but it's not. So.
It's not. Yeah.
But your journey was not like, oh, I decided I like to draw, and then I went to art school. You kind of went in a different direction for a while.
Yep. Everybody in my family, it seems, are teachers or social workers, are helping the world, and I always felt that somehow art was frivolous. And so I always tried to fit it in, and I felt, well, when I went to college first, I was like, I have to study art history. I have to somehow parlay this into a career. And you know, it wasn't before life took over. I was in an accident. I had some time to take some classes, and for the first time I allowed myself to take studio art classes, and it was like, oh my gosh, you mean I could have enjoyed school and done well in it all this time, you know. And and as I say, that really important conversation I had with that aunt of mine made me feel that, I was always a hard worker, whatever I did, whatever job I did, but it really made me feel better about, okay, I'm pursuing something, I'm an artist, now I can say those words when people say, what are you doing? And I didn't have to be sort of ashamed, like, well, I'm just, signed up with a temp agency, I'm working here, there, So it made me feel better. And when I finished art school in the Boston area, I didn't consider myself a landscape painter at all. I was really interested in pursuing illustration.
Did you go through the whole, did you get a BFA or did you, okay, so you went through all of the foundation courses and 3D, 2D and all of that stuff, and you kind of had a major in illustration.
Yes. And it's funny, I didn't consider myself a landscape painter at all, and now living in Jamestown, it's most of what I do. Because look where I live. There's just beauty all around me.
Picturesque is the first word you'd think of.
But I definitely, sometimes people have said, well, there's an illustrative quality to your paintings, and even the paintings that I brought, there's definitely, even if I'm painting something that's a pure landscape, there's a story in my head about, a walk that I took, or something, or somebody that lives in there, and there's always a story.
That's the nature of being an illustrator, is that you have to tell a story, and especially since you were pursuing being a commercial illustrator and doing that thing that we used to do back in those days, dropping off portfolios and hoping that an art director will like your work and give you an assignment.
Well, it's hard. The world has changed so much now. So many people can self-publish.
Yes.
And so back when I lived in the city, I really enjoyed working with some art directors, because you work together to do that illustration. I was working on it, and the art director would say, well, I like this drawing, but maybe you could put in a little bit of this or that, and I liked that process. I like collaborating with someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really feel, there's a lot of wonderful things that people publish themselves, but there are things where I think to myself, they could have used an editor,
Yeah, that's true with writing and illustrating. Everybody thinks that because they have the correct software that they're automatically a graphic designer.
Right.
And, that's how things go.
Yeah, but I really value, that's something when people have this romanticized idea that, oh, you're an artist, that means you can just do whatever you want.
Right.
And also I was working with a local art teacher in the school. She wanted me to help the kids with a mural, because I did a lot of murals. And how to take a small drawing and transform it into a wall, or
like old-timey
space.
With a grid and everything?
Yes, I showed the kids how to do it with a grid and everything. But she said, well, if you want to see what it's like to teach art, you can substitute teach for me a few times. And I did, and I like kids, and people were like, oh, that'd be perfect for you, Alex. Well, no. I discovered that, there's very little art going on. It's mostly discipline and, and also if you tried to, there was always a few students in the class that were doing wonderful things, but really they would have been doing them even if I wasn't there. They were sitting there lost in their own project, their own drawing. And then sometimes I would try to say, oh, well, I like how you, put that apple there. Maybe if you tried to, imagine a light source. You can't tell me because it's art, so it's whatever I think is good, and I'm happy with it. So I don't want to,
That'll happen.
I was like, oh, okay.
Sometimes it's better to do maybe a one-on-one thing. Like I could even envision you bringing people into your studio and giving lessons that way. But yeah, working in a group, that takes a special temperament.
I have given art lessons sometimes, where there's somebody older that says, look, this is something I always wanted to do, and now that I'm retired, and that's great because older people listen to you.
Yeah.
They don't argue with you, which is nice.
Well, I used to teach a drawing class where the object of it was to make you uncomfortable. So I'd make people draw with the wrong hand.
Right.
I'd make people draw without looking at the paper, and it would. If you do that enough, it is mind expanding.
Yes.
You can feel your brain getting bigger. So that was gratifying, and that again was with older people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We can start showing your artwork while we continue our conversation.
Sure.
So if you can just hold things up so that Andrew can see what you're doing.
Well,
or just
perhaps
pointing.
we can start with the bigger things, and
Yep.
then I'll hold up. These are part of a series that
You want to start with that one?
I became very interested in what I call my sleeping beauties. In mostly women and girls sleeping. And because they, when they're sleeping, they're not as self-conscious. And then I also could allow myself, as you can see, I'm pretty representational. But when I was doing people sleeping, then whatever I felt I wanted to do, people will say, oh, well, does that mean that she's dreaming about a cat, or she's dreaming about, whatever you want, however you want to interpret it. But I like to, some paintings like that one, I just am capturing the bond,
Cat painting.
the intimacy of the girl and her dog. And
Now, are these subjects, are these people that you know?
Sometimes I use my kids or their friends, but usually I try not to talk about them or name them, because then people say, oh, that feels like my daughter and her dog, or that, and I don't want to contradict them. I don't want them thinking, oh, that's a girl named Katie that lives in Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
Because the work is supposed to be interactive with the viewer as well, so I could see that.
Yeah.
And you don't want to influence them.
Right. So, and then with the pandemic, now here I felt that what a lot of us were doing, my kids were doing school online, and so falling asleep with your laptop in bed and maybe a cat, or it was kind of the way our lives were. Yes. And I think those of us who have cats or dogs, I think they were thrilled with working from home. They were like, this is the way life should be.
Yeah. I've heard of people whose pets got neurotic when they started going back out again, but that's a whole other story. Now, are these acrylic?
These are oil. These
okay.
I like to work, even when I work in acrylic, I mostly work, I was trained in sort of an old master method, and I like to use acrylics the same way, using lots of layers with glazes and things like that.
Absolutely. You have some interesting color work. I don't even know if we can pick it up on the TV, but you have like pinks and greens mixed up in there, and that's really intriguing.
Well, I definitely, another way that I take an illustrative approach is you know, sometimes somebody might see a landscape and maybe that's more straightforward. I'm painting something that I look at. But I am always constructing a scene. You know, I'll paint a landscape and I'll think, you know what? I want a cow to be standing there eating grass, or I want a little girl reading a book in that field. And so I sort of construct these the same way, you know, it's kind of like, well, I want, you know, I definitely, one thing that I learned in art school, well, I used to be afraid of color. I always liked drawing, but I really had to study color, and because I usually just never used color at all. And then also, I learned to really think about the page. My teachers really helped me with composition and drawing. And I found that when I taught, for instance, if I taught life drawing, I learned that, you know, just rendering something is not the only point.
No, of course.
And sometimes people would get hung up. They'd have a model in front of them, and there would be this big piece of paper, and there in one corner is this beautifully rendered hand, and they're just spending all their time trying to make that hand as perfect as I can. But you look at that paper, and it's like, who does that hand belong to? Where
you want to take the scissors to it just to make it into something that's that works.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's just so that really, and that sort of never left me. I mean, I guess you could say it's part of studying illustration, is thinking about the page, thinking about what you're communicating. And
let's keep moving to the next
okay.
one, so because we're actually almost.
Oh, okay. Here's another one with a woman sleeping with her cat and a laptop. And
well, no, just
this one.
You can just leave it up for a little bit, because we're going to pick up the pace a little bit.
Sure.
So you're using the shapes to kind of to focus things.
Yeah.
Everything is triangulating towards the center, and you can't help but get a placid feeling from it, just from the attitude of the animal.
That's what I
people.
want. Yeah.
There's something really magical about cats' faces too.
I agree.
Because if you look at a cat's face and then you look at a lion, they're the same.
They're the
and
same.
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely, I mean, when we're talking about art, something I think that you and I have touched on before, I loved art school because I met a lot of people, my classmates. We all did different things. I mean, some were comic book artists, other, you know, and yet the wonderful thing about it was that we all respected and valued what each other was doing, and we could critique each other's stuff because we knew what the person was trying to say.
It makes things really dimensional when you have somebody who has a different perspective, kind of challenging you.
Yeah.
Like your grandfather, mathematician, and making sure you get the proportions right.
Right.
I had experiences like that too. I lived with an architect and an interior designer and an illustrator, and we'd have incredible squabbles over different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is one of your landscapes that you added a person to?
This is, well, it's funny because I definitely studied the figure so much, and, you know, we live near a lot of beautiful beaches, and a lot of people paint beaches, but a lot of people are afraid of the human figure. And to me, that's very important because I love watching how a child will get absorbed in making something or digging in the sand, and that's what I look for, not just a beach with
well, you
nothing
have
there.
You have two daunting subjects there: the human figure and water. A lot of people are terrified of water.
Well, I do. I find as you've pointed out, I live very close to it.
Sure.
So
Yeah. And you have some of your animals?
yes, and I love spending time at farms, and
Hold those up vertically so
like
Andrew
that?
can get a picture.
and I like doing. I have painted murals in the past. I like working on bigger things, but I have gotten to really enjoy these 6-inch animal portraits because I like, for instance, this cow named Jenny. I mean, talk about a story. Jenny has a lot of. she has a story, and
Does Jenny live with you?
no, Jenny doesn't live with me. She lives with some friends of mine. She's a Jersey. They have beautiful long lashes, and she.
Sure.
Yeah, she's sort of a matriarchal figure in the barnyard. A lot of animals ask her for advice. Jenny knows what she's talking about. So you see, the personality comes through when I'm painting these animal portraits, and I like to paint small because it's sort of like they're a little gem, and I can work on them more quickly than a larger thing. But I like working in both large and small. I like doing
Yeah,
murals.
absolutely.
I like doing little.
Well, you get a real sense of intimacy. I mean, you don't usually think of animal portraits being intimate.
That's what I'm going for.
Absolutely.
And then I did do some pandemic art too. I found we were
You were baking?
everybody was baking. There was no yeast to be had anywhere around.
I remember the yeast encounters in the supermarkets, yes.
Yes. So I enjoyed doing still lives of food, and because I think everybody was at home more. So these sort of homey subjects, still lives of hearkening back to fine art, just an apple or a loaf of bread with a knife, and
Sure.
that
has
interested
better
me.
legs than the, let's just be polite and call them unpublishable diaries that
Right.
people kept.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Because there are a lot of those. I think the visual arts have a little bit more clout over the verbal
Well,
or literal sometimes.
sometimes, yes, and I definitely I feel that I have lots of artist friends and artists I met in school, and we love and value what each other does. But I know that some people feel that maybe I'm more of a
Actually,
sellout because
I
I'm
have
too
to
accessible.
Interrupt you because we literally actually just ran out of time. So I want to
okay.
thank you
You're
so much
welcome.
for coming by and showing this all to us today.
Happy to talk about art anytime.
Thank you for stopping by for another episode of Art Matters, and we'll see you next time.